بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلوات وأتم التسليمات على سيدنا محمد النبي الأمين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. So the conversation that I had with Mawlana Abdul Wahid yesterday, I think we were discussing whether or not there was a need for a presentation. And over the years, I've become less and less a fan of visual aids, because I think they're visual crutches sometimes. Oftentimes we're not, in this case, it's not necessarily in view of everyone anyway, but oftentimes we become so over-dependent upon like eye candy that we don't, I think, get the actual crux of the message, and we lose sight of the actual intention. On top of that, I'm not as eloquent as Human, and intentionality and paradigm shifts and cognitive frames and ethos and those types of terms. I think Islam is so amazing that the concepts that were provided in the history of Islamic civilization, whether they be ethical or legal or theological, they be in the fields of aqidah and kalam or in fiqh or in tasawwuf and tazkiyah, they're articulated in such a simple manner, but yet they're so profound. And I think that many ulama, when they read the works of like Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayh, and they read the works of Imam Shatibi and Shah Wali Allah is very difficult to access. Maybe Shah Wali Allah doesn't fall into this category. But Imam Ghazali, many people read Imam Ghazali and they think, oh, this is very easy. Like, mashallah, very simple concepts, simple terminology. And then they study like deep discursive theology and philosophy and logic. And then they come back to Ghazali and they're just blown away. The depth of the kalam of these great imams, the frameworks that they develop for spiritual development. Oftentimes people like myself and Human himself, you'll be the first to admit it, we kind of feel forced to use terminology that I think betrays the simplicity and profundity, I just used the term, profundity, of these concepts. So the psychology of personal change, if you look at this, this title, this was kind of like a jab at Mawlana Abdul Wahid, because I was like, Mawlana Abdul Wahid, I don't know if we need to use terms like this. It's just like eye candy, right? Positive behavior modification. It's like islah, you need to do your islah. You need positive behavior modification. You psycho-spiritual equilibrium. I just made that up, by the way. That's i'tidal, like moderation in your behavior, moderation in yourself. But we like these terms, if you hear this at University of Toronto lecture, it's just like, man, this is so profound. Where's your book? I want, can you sign it for me? Imam Ghazali calls it i'tidal, You need to achieve i'tidal in your mizaj. And sometimes you hear these in like the Jummah khutbahs and we're like, it doesn't sound, kullu jadid ladhi, doesn't sound new enough. So I need to hear it in this, kind of convoluted language for me to be impressed and to act upon it. So I kind of wanted to do both things. I'm going to try to simplify, but at the same time give you some of these concepts. This is intentional. I'm using terms intentionally just to kind of show you that they're not necessary. Okay. The topic of personal change, subhanAllah, I was just thinking on doing this trip, the first and the major, I think, event of personal change in my life came in Toronto. And I think I'm saying it right, Toronto, right? Toronto, without the T, Toronto. Toronto, so I came here in 96 or 94, sophomore in high school. It was my winter break. I came in Jamaat. I didn't want to be in Jamaat here, but my cousin was going, and they, on the way to the markaz, picked me up from my house. And my uncle convinced my father to send me along because my cousin didn't want to go alone. So okay, fine. And I came here, and the environmental, this is because Human was talking about this, the idea of environment, it was such a life-changing experience for me. I mean, it became the catalyst, the trigger for personal change because of the fact that I was with a group of young high school students who spent time sleeping on the floor, listening to basic concepts that were revolutionary for me at that time, and eating Popeyes, and having pillow fights in the night, and telling jinn stories. And that was like, for me, it was such an exciting time in my life because I never experienced that before. I never seen this in Sunday school because I come from like a Brampton-like area, a suburb of Chicago, and I appreciate that Mawlana Abdul Wahid kind of said that Glen Ellen is a suburb of Chicago. Like you usually just say Chicago, right? So he appreciates the difference between a suburb and the city. So I grew up from a similar suburb of Chicago, where Islam was taught in the classroom in Sunday school, but you never actually saw people sitting on the ground during lectures or eating with their hands and sharing the same plate and drinking from the same cup. And so when I had that experience, that environment was so powerful for me that it definitely triggered a major change and a motivation to be in good company. Right? تَقَعُ الطُّيُورُ عَلَى أَشْكَالِهَا, as they say, that birds of a feather flock together. I found my flock. I thought these are good people to be around. And the fact that there were other young people who were also motivated enough to spend their winter vacation, on Jamaat, essentially, that was a huge, huge thing for me. So, but what I really wanted to talk about was the idea that when you're young or when you're old, you have certain spiritual states that can be imbalanced. And Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi in his Ihya Ulumuddin, if anyone hasn't read this book, and you may not read it on your own, you should read it with a teacher. If you haven't read the Ihya Ulumuddin, you might consider your heart dead. As one of the scholars said, that man lam yaqra al-ihya falaysa min al-ahya. The one who hasn't read the Ihya, he's not from the ahya, he's not from the living. Because we have such dead hearts and imbalanced personalities and behaviors that we don't realize it until we read books like the Ihya Ulumuddin. If you read the Ihya Ulumuddin, and it covers like all the major character traits, positive and negative, and speaks about how to remove negative traits and acquire positive traits, how to develop habits, the adat, and how to improve your ibadat. There's like two constant and consistent themes throughout the book. One of them is the idea of i'tidal, and I think the other one, and this is just my personal reflection, that one constant theme throughout the book is the idea of i'tibar. That we have to be people who take lessons, like people of ibrah, people who see like symbols and symbolism, and see like the message behind things. Like Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi says that when people go for Hajj, and they're at the Maidan of Arafat, they should now reflect on the Maidan of Hashar, and when we will be taken to account for our deeds. When we're putting the ihram on, we should reflect on when we die, that there will be a kafan put on us. When we go to sleep, every night, you're entering into this, it's so profound. You're getting into a state where you have no control over what you're doing. The people that actually sleepwalk and they go outside their house, they'll go to the store and they'll just wake up and where am I? It's a state of complete lack of control. When you're in that state, how helpless do you feel? There are people who have a lot of anxiety because of the fact that when they go to sleep, they don't know what's going to happen, right? You don't know if you're going to wake up alive. You don't know if you're going to sleepwalk. You don't know if you're going to hurt someone. That's like death. You lose complete control. And so sleep is the sister of death. So it's like something you should reflect on. To the extent that I heard of one elder in the United States that he built a grave in his backyard and he would lie in it every day as a muraqabah, as a reflection. Right? One of the old elders of Tabligh, African American brothers. So he would do this. Why? To be a person of ibrah. When we walk down the street and, Human was mentioning this idea that we're so distracted with our phones and other things that we don't necessarily have time to think, and it becomes kind of a disorder. You're itching for your phone all the time. If you actually, I'm probably the first and foremost, the most guilty party here. But if you're walking down the street and you have just a moment to yourself, what do? You check if you got new messages, somebody posted something on Twitter. Who's looking around at the birds, right? Who's looking at the grass? Who's looking at the cars passing by? Who comes to Jummah thinking, look at all these other people who are driving on the same street, where are they going? And how many of them have been selected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to visit His house today? People, Imam Ghazali wants us to be people of reflection. Because if you reflect, then you change your behavior because of that reflection. We don't see symbols anymore. We're so black and white, ones and zeros, and we're always occupying our time with these weapons of mass distraction. That's not my term, I didn't coin it either. Right? These phones and television and games, and we invest so much of our hope and our fear in these things and this is not constructive hope or constructive fear. This is, I think, negative and destructive hopes and fears. The Cubs just won the World Series, right? And it was so contagious, the happiness in Chicago. We left on Friday when like they were having the parade. And even if you didn't have your radio on, I mean, you couldn't avoid the contagious happiness everybody was experiencing. Even White Sox fans who were like rivals, they were having like, yeah, you know what, it's not so bad, you know? Good for them. And I was just thinking about the time where, you know, because I grew up a White Sox fan when I was young, and then I went to madrasa, and in 2006 I was still in Pakistan. In 2005 they won the World Series. I didn't care, like I really didn't care. Oh great, they won the World Series, and I was just thinking that, man, when my team won the World Series in 2005, I didn't really care, and I just had like lost that emotional attachment, that hope and that fear that you checking the score with. Man, I hope they won, right? I hope the Maple Leafs won, right? You got the Maple Leafs are level losers of Toronto, right? The Chicago Cubs of Toronto. So, you know, like, if you lose the game, there's like this fear. Why? Strange fear. This hope that if they win, it's like, I also won. Even though you didn't win anything. And if you didn't attend a game or watch the match or the game, none of the players care that you attended or didn't attend the game, watched the game, didn't watch the game, right? They have no emotional investment in you, and you've emotionally invested so much in something that really means nothing. It's lahu, right? It's la'ib. So that there is like, we have these imbalances of hope and fear, but they're not constructive. So Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi, he talks about throughout the book the idea that we have to reach an i'tidal in our character. And I call that psycho-spiritual equilibrium, right? Or balance. A balance in our character. And what that is that Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi says that there are two character traits that actually go hand in hand, and people mistakenly think that they're opposites, and they're very constructive for developing a change in yourself, right? And then he begins this discussion by first explaining what he means by hope and how hope comes into play. So he says, like, look, every human experience can be divided into that which relates to the past, and we call those like dhikr or athkar. We call them like memories, things that you remember. The present, that's dhawq. Those are experiences. And then the future human experiences, which are called tawaqqu'at, right? So memories, experiences, and expectations. And then expectations can be divided into two types, right? So when you think about the future experiences that you're going to have, you think of them as either positive or negative. If they're positive, we call that raja, and if it's negative, we call that khawf, right? So constructive hope, raja. Constructive fear, and I use the word constructive for a reason, positive fear, positive hope for a reason. That's called khawf. And then he says that, look, positive expectations about your future are not the same as what they call tamanni. So hope is also to be divided into two types. Like, you see how this framework, Imam Ghazali creates this amazing framework for understanding the self and understanding human experiences. So he says that hope can be divided into those which are effectual, that actually are backed by sabab, by actions, right? That you're actually acting upon those hopes. And that's what we call raja. And then there's ineffectual, tamanni, like vain hopes. And he gives the example, the farmer metaphor. He says, imagine, and this is what we do, right? This is especially young people. We have these vain hopes. الكيس من دان نفسه وعمل لما بعد الموت والعاجز من أتبع نفسه هواها وتمنى على الله. That the intelligent person, Rasulullah ﷺ says, that the intelligent person is the one, man dana nafsahu, who suppresses himself, right? This is part of the personal change issue. You have to like suppress that desire. وعمل لما بعد الموت, and then he thinks like if he becomes a distant thinker. He thinks about the investment of the akhirah. وعمل, so he acts in accordance with his akhirah. He acts for that which is going to come after death. والعاجز, the one who's incapable. I saw it in a translation as the fool, and I saw one translation as the idiot. I think it's more like a person who's ajiz. He's incapable. You know, people want to be capable, right? I could do anything I want. No, you're ajiz. Ajiz actually was a really like insulting thing to, you know, al-ajiz. Like you're ajiz. You're not capable of anything. You're incompetent, incapable, right? You're a nincompoop. I don't know if they use that term anymore. Nincompoop, right? Who is the ajiz? Man atba'a nafsahu hawaha. He subjects his self to his desires. His nafs right? He says, just follow what you want to do. Do what you want to do. It's your planet. You know, all those slogans that we have. Do what you want to do. It's your planet. It's your time, right? Just do, listen to yourself. Listen to your feelings. And then, وَتَمَنَّ عَلَى اللَّهِ. And then he has hope in Allah. So Imam Ghazali says, this tamanni, this is ineffectual hope. This is like the farmer who goes every day out to his field. He looks at it and he says, I hope that one day crop will grow from the field. As opposed to the one who every day wakes up early in the morning, tills the soil, plows the soil, right? Plants the seed, waters the soil, right? And does everything possible. He adopts all of the asbab, all the means, and then he says, oh Allah, I hope that the crop will grow. Meaning he adopts all the necessary means, and now he has hope. So effectually, Imam Ghazali rahmatullah is saying that there's like an ineffectual and effectual hope. That foolish hope is that you don't do anything to succeed. You don't do anything to get to paradise. But then you hope Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah is Ghafur Rahim. Dude, when I'm old, I'll go to Madani Masjid, I'll go to Masjid Taqwa, I'll go to Rashad Center, and I'll sit on the chair in the back, and I won't have anything to do. I'll be retired, fine, right? We have that kind of this hope. But you're not doing anything to get to that point. You know how hard it is for the elders of the community to sacrifice so much to come to the masjid every day? Sheikh Hashim, who's going to do a program for us, inshallah ta'ala, on a healthy living in Chicago, Thanksgiving weekend. If anybody wants to come, mashallah, please come to that. It's going to be amazing. I mean, Sheikh Hashim is just an amazing person. If anyone doesn't know, suffice it to say that he is like an elderly Sheikh al-Hadith who also surfs, and he's in Karachi, and he was like a convert Muslim who traveled as a singer from Morocco all the way to Yemen and Mecca and studied Qur'an and then taught Hadith and Qur'an in Karachi for the rest of his existing life. Alhamdulillah. That's Sheikh Hashim, right? So he's going to talk about, that was my plug for that program. So Sheikh Hashim, I was sitting with him one day, and he was saying to us, Tullab al-Ilm, he said, a long story short, the point of it was this. That why is it that a student of knowledge, the more he studies, the further he gets back in the saf? You see, like the Torah Hadith student, he'll be in the last saf, he'll be masbuk. And the same kind of the Islamically illiterate elder who may not even be able to perform sajda properly because he needs assistance. He may be praying while sitting. Every single salah, he's in the front saf. Doesn't miss takbiratul ula, right? So what fa'idah was the ilm for you? That your ilm took you away from the first saf. That's a big, that's a huge achievement. You don't understand how difficult it is to be that consistent for so long, and then to give your life to the ibadah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we have like this hope that we one day will do that. But you're not doing anything to actually have that izzah of the deen in your heart, such that when you have that time when you're older, you won't sit in front of the telly all day, television, watching what is that, the ice broom thing that you guys, curling, yeah, curling. Can't even believe this is a sport. And then, or basketball. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm a little ignorant of the sports here. So this is like vain hope. How is that going to benefit you in the end when you haven't created like an izz and ihtiram for these concepts? Like, one of the young, new masjid leaders was telling me something really interesting. He said, we grew up thinking that we're different from our parents' generation. That, we don't have all this cultural baggage, and we're going to, mashallah, build wonderful, glorious institutions and give so much of our money and invest and this and that. He says the young people don't give zakat, they don't give sadaqah to the masjid, they don't donate. It's still the old generation. Because we grew up with a culture that doesn't have ihtiram for the sadaqah, for paying for the masajid. If I ask the people who donate, ask Mawlana Abdul Wahid who donates. It's not the young guys who just got out of, they'll be like, no, I have to pay off all my bills, and I have to do this, I have to pay off my loans. For some reason, our generation doesn't have that same sakhawa, that same generosity, because it's not part of our culture. So we have this vain hope, right? And what is the importance of having positive hope or constructive hope? I want to get to the next slide, inshallah. So, have anyone heard of the idea of positive psychology? Positive psychology, the idea that if you have positive thoughts, it can bring about a change in your life. You ever heard of that? If you haven't, then I'll just skip the discussion of it. Positive psychology essentially is the idea and Human can correct me if I'm wrong, that positive thoughts can actually affect change in your behavior and the outcomes in your life. You can change your future by positive thought. Now this idea, just like the idea of raja, can also be abused, right? If a person, he has no fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then he goes to the masjid, and the masjid imam is saying, you need to have hope in Jannah, Jannah, Jannah. Don't talk about Jahannam all the time. Jannah, Jannah, Jannah. Have hope in the mercy of Allah. Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi would argue that this person is going to be even further imbalanced if you abuse the idea of hope. Positive psychology is used by corporations sometimes to tell employees who are never going to get a raise, never move up in the corporation, that if you have good thoughts, you'll be able to affect you. That's why, this CEO is a CEO, because he's a positive thinker. So positive thought can make a change in of itself, right, without any other means, the adoption of any other means. But sometimes that's actually not the case, right? Sometimes a person, he does have a lot of positive thought, but if he has positive thought that this injury go away just by my thinking, it may not go away, right? But what is the actual change that occurs because of positive thought? This is actually really profound. It's even beyond the claim of corporations about how you can change your future. You can change your future through positive thought beyond even this dunya. I mean, this dunya is what? It's the wing of a mosquito. It doesn't mean anything, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Hadith Qudsi, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam narrates that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Ana 'inda dhanni 'abdi bi." I am with my slave in accordance with his expectations of me. Meaning, and according to one Mujahid rahmatullah alayhi, mentions in tafsir, that on the day of judgment, a man will be brought and he will be told, it will be told that take this person to the fire. And then he will say, مَا كَانَ هَذَا ظَنِّي. This wasn't my expectation, O Allah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say, what was your dhan? وَمَا كَانَ ظَنُّكَ كَانَ أَن تَغْفِرَ لِي. What was your expectation? Allah will ask. He will say that, oh Allah, I expected you to forgive me. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say, خَلُّوا سَبِيلَهُ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say, let him go. Your eternal future, salvation, can be achieved by what? Your dhan with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's real positive psychology, right? Because you may be in ibtila your entire life, but the positive thoughts that you use in this world can be so constructive that your entire akhirah can change, right? And if you have shikwa, you die with this complaint that, oh Allah, why did you do this with me? Why did you do this with me? Oh Allah, how could Allah do this, right? How can Allah, how can Allah forgive me? My sins are so bad that how could Allah forgive me? Even God couldn't forgive. This is an expression you hear sometimes. Even God couldn't forgive that. If that's what you think of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy, you won't get it. You'll be deprived of it. So positive psychology is that this positive thought that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is so merciful that even if I was to kill 99 people, think of the man from Banu Israel, he killed 99 people. That's mass murder, right? That's something wrong with that. That's a serial killer. He comes to a person, a scholar of his time, he says, is there any forgiveness for me? He says, no, because how could you kill 99 people? You want forgiveness, right? He kills him 100. But yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you know the story, he gets forgiven. Why? Because he recognized that despite all that sin, Allah's mercy is greater than his sins. So that's what? Having a positive thought with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is really powerful. There are so many of us because we look at people who are superior to us in terms of dunya, who have more wealth, and they flout it on Instagram and on YouTube, and they have their own channels, and they talk about how much money they make, right? And how big of a car they have, or nice of a car they have, big of a house they have. And we look at this and we're constantly exposed to it, and it sickens us. It's a disease to expose yourself to these things, right? That's the wrong environment. That we actually lose an expectation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He could ever change us and take us out of the situation that we're in, maybe that financial difficulty or constraint that we're in. We're trapped. I mean, literally people who tell you, like, I just feel completely trapped. Like, well, so-and-so and so-and-so got out of this poverty. So-and-so got out of this difficulty. Why don't you think, no, it won't happen to me. What happened to me? This is an issue of iman. That you don't think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could change your condition? I've seen cancer patients, the day that they die, still think that Allah wants to cure me, Allah will cure me today. And if Allah wants to give me death, then I am content with that. That is iman. And that usually increases until that person dies. It's what? It's rafu darajat. It's the raising of a person's station. So to summarize, and I'm just going to, inshallah ta'ala, really briefly, talk about how to attain positive hope or raja in our life. Imam Ghazali, rahmatullahi alayhi, as I mentioned before, he says about contemplation. Contemplate. Think about all the blessings Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you. For young people especially, here, I don't know, I think this is a more wealthy suburb, the Brampton area. You know, the people who are the least grateful for what they have are the people who have the most, right? You know that. Think about all the things that you have been blessed with. Go take a drive around those areas where people are less blessed than yourself. And contemplate about all the things Allah has given you. I swear by Allah, this is the promise of Allah. Allah will give you more for that. Just because of that contemplation. And if you show ingratitude, not only will Allah and the malaika turn their mercy away from you, but even people will not like you. Nobody likes an ungrateful person, right? Who's always complaining, and I don't have enough. Man, I wanted the new Tesla. I wanted the iPhone 7. My mom got me the iPhone 6S. Are you serious? Right? And then ikhtibar. Ikhtibar, he means by ikhtibar the idea that read the stories of the people of the past and read the narrations about Jannah, read about the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is basically in layman's terms what? Go to Ta'aleem, man. Read Riyadh al-Salihin, go to after Fajr Dars of Mawlana Zakaria and Masjid Taqwa. Amazing Dars of Riyadh al-Salihin. Right? Read those akhbar, study those akhbar that give us hope in the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he says also fear, right? How do we use fear as a behavioral modifier? Behavioral modifier, forgive me again, one of those terms I just used. How do we make it a muslih? How do we make it rectify our behavior? He says first recognize who you are. If you recognize how low of a person you are, you will fear that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will punish you for that. Right? And then what that will lead to, right? The recognition of Allah, the ma'rifah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which will lead to behavioral change. The reason why we don't change our behavior is we don't fear Allah enough, he says. Right? There was a king, he was with his entourage passing by a pathway. A dervish type of man, a qalanda type of a man was walking on that same road, and he didn't move. The king said to him, "Ala ta'rifuni?" He's like, "Don't you see the king is coming, the emperor is coming? Don't you know who I am?" He says, "But araftuk, I know who you are. Awaluka nutfatun madira. Your beginning was a dirty drop of fluid. Wa akhiruka jifatun qadira. And your end will be a rotting carcass. Wa hashu ma bayna dhalika bawlun wa adhira. And you'll just be filled in between those two periods with urine and feces." Right? That's who you are. And the king, Allah give him jazah, he said, "Wallahi laqad araftani." I swear by Allah, you recognized who I am. You know who I am. If you know who you are, meaning you don't do this with the king, right? You do this with yourself, then who am I? Right? What do we say? You know who I am? Let's take us outside. Right? We start posturing, bumping. How dare you? You know who I am? We should really think, who am I? All the sins that I've committed in my life. My teacher used to say, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exposed the thoughts that we have in our salah to people, no one would want to be our friends. That's who we are. So if we have the fear then that Allah will take us to task for these things, then we will recognize who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, and that will actually change our behavior. This is how we attain between the two wings of the same bird, right? Imam Ghazali says, fear is not a bad thing. Fear is not the opposite of hope. Amazing. He says fear is not the opposite of hope. Fear is the other wing of the same bird. If you don't have fear and you don't have hope, that bird will not fly. You have to create a balance. You have to be aware you have an imbalance. Too much fear, right, at the time of death is not good. That's why when a person is near death, you talk to them about hope. Hope in the mercy of Allah. And when a person is young, right, and they don't see any consequence to their actions, then you need to kind of give them a little dose of fear, maybe a big dose of fear. That's psycho-spiritual equilibrium or i'tidal. And again, how do you get that? I'll leave that for the next speech, inshallah ta'ala, because I think the embodiment of that will come up after me, inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all tawfiq.